Most people know this place as a winery, but the deeper that you look into the history of this property, the less it lines up with what you see today. It was built to be a house for people who had nowhere to go. The elderly, the sick, the forgotten. And over time, the records start getting unclear. Hundreds of unmarked burials, entire sections of land with no documentation. People who visit here describe things that they couldn't explain, and that is where things start to get interesting. Because when you strip away the elegance, the tours, and the modern branding, you're left with a property that may have never fully let go of what it used to be. Today, it's known as the Belvoir Winery, but long before that, it was known as the Oddfellow Home. There's a property in Liberty, Missouri, a place where people come together to book their weddings, enjoy wine tastings, and to book overnight stays. At face value, it looks like a restored historic estate. But the reality is, this place was never built for leisure. The location now known as the Belvoir Winery and Inn was originally designed as a large institutional complex that housed hundreds of people at a time. A mix between children, patients, and elderly residents, all living on the same property for decades. Today, it's also considered one of the most consistently reported haunted locations in the Kansas City area, and unlike a lot of places that get labeled as haunted based on one story or one event, this one is different. Because the reputation isn't tied to one single event, it's tied to a scale of what happened here over time. So instead of jumping right into ghost stories, we're going to break this down the right way. What all's documented, what's reported, and what are people still experiencing here today. To understand what happened in this building, you have to understand who built it and what they swore to do. The Independent Order of Odd Fellows is one of the oldest fraternal orders in America. They came over from England in the early 1800s. By the time the Civil War had ended, they had lodges in every town in the United States. Their motto was friendship, love, and trust. And their oath was simpler than that. Visit the sick, bury the dead, educate the orphan, care for the widow. In 1889, the Missouri chapter of the Odd Fellows decided they were going to keep their promise on a scale no other lodge had ever attempted. They bought 234 acres of farmland just outside Liberty, Missouri, a quiet town 20 miles northeast of Kansas City, and they started to build. By the year 1900, the centerpiece was complete. A 3-story brick building they called the Odd Folks Home. By 1907, they added the Orphans Home. Then they added a hospital, a nursing facility, and the cemetery. On the day that it opened, it was the largest fraternal care campus west of the Mississippi. They took in any odd fellow that was left behind, widows whose husbands had died in the lodge, children whose parents were both gone, and the elderly that had nowhere else to go. At its peak, more than 400 people lived on this campus at the same time, a mix of children in the orphanage, the elderly, and patients in the hospital. In some way or another, all of them had been left behind, but almost none of them ever left the Oddfellow home. The Orphans' Home was the part of the campus that the Odd Fellows talked about the most. It was supposed to be proof, the visual promise that the order kept its word. On paper, it was. Children were fed, they were educated, they were all clothed and given a trade. That way they would be sent into the world when they were 18 with somewhere to go and something to do. On paper, everything looked great, but in practice, it was an institution. A child who arrived at the Oddfellow home was almost always arriving on the worst day of their life. Their mother was dead, their father was dead, and sometimes both in the same week and from the same disease. They got off a wagon or a train with whatever fit in a single bag, and they walked up those steps, and then a stranger took that bag. Records from the orphan home are mostly incomplete. Some were lost in moves, some orders had never been released. But what survives makes a few things very clear. Many children did die here, and not in unusual numbers for the era, but a lot of them, they did die. Either of things like influenza in 1918 or tuberculosis on and off for decades. I even found reports of kids dying in accidents on the property or even a drowning in the creek. And most of them are buried in the cemetery on the southeast corner of the campus. The cemetery on the property has roughly 600 graves, and some of the markers are no more than a number. No name and no date, literally just a number, assigned by the order the day the body went in the ground. Also located on the property was a 3-story hospital. The hospital was added in 1907. It included a surgical theater on the 2nd floor, and on the 3rd floor had long-term care. The 3rd floor is the one that investigators talk about the most. The 3rd floor of the hospital is where people went to die. The patients who weren't going home. People with things like tuberculosis who were forced to be kept apart. These people were very old, very sick, and at the end of their life. In the records that I found, they suggest that in the 1918 influenza pandemic, the hospital ended up losing more than it could keep up with. Some reports even say that the morgue that was placed in the basement ended up overflowing. Now, even though the morgue was down in the basement, you can ask anyone who's ever spent the night in that building, and they will tell you the same thing, just maybe in some different words, that the 3rd floor is the most haunted. On the 3rd floor, visitors and staff have reported the same handful of things again and again, going back for decades. Footsteps heard in every room. The sound of a hospital bed being wheeled across the floor that no longer holds a hospital bed. A woman's voice, calm, conversational, coming from behind a closed door at the end of the hallway, speaking to someone who isn't answering. And the most common report by a large margin is the laughter of children. The children that died in that hospital wing were technically not even supposed to be there. The orphans' wing had its own infirmary, but during the worst years, the flu and the tuberculosis waves, there just wasn't space. Sick children were moved to the 3rd floor, and some of them never came back down. That, according to people who investigate the building, is who you hear laughing. By the 1950s, the Oddfellows were running out of money and out of members. Fraternal orders all over America were dying. The country, it didn't need lodges to hold its widows up anymore, because now they had things like Social Security. The orphans' home closed in 1958. The last children walked out and the building was sealed. The hospital and the nursing home limped on for about 2 more decades. The last residents were moved out in the late 1970s. The lights went off, the doors were locked, and the building was left alone. For roughly 30 years, that campus sat empty and in plain view from the state highway. It became what abandoned hospitals always become. Teenagers broke in, urban explorers took photographs, and vandals took everything else. The roof started to fail and trees came up through the floor of the orphanage wing. The cemetery, somehow, was never disturbed. Every local kid in Liberty knew the exact same dare. Dare someone to go stay the night at the Oddfellows' home. And the truth is, most of them never even made it past sundown. The stories that came out of those years are not on historical record. These are the stories of urban myths and legends. Stories of figures in the window when the building was sealed off, or of voices on the property that should be empty. In 2008, a Kansas City couple bought the property and began restoring it. They opened part of the campus as a winery with an event center, and eventually a stop on the regional paranormal tour. But that last part, it was not part of the original plan. They started the restoration believing that the local stories were exactly what local stories usually are. Some exaggerations or, told by drunk teenagers that grow into legends. But within a year, every contractor on the property had some kind of a haunted experience there. Some would report tools moving on their own or hearing footsteps following workers from room to room. There was an instance where a radio turned itself to a station that doesn't even exist on the dial. By the time the restoration was complete, the owner had stopped trying to explain things. By this time, major paranormal investigation teams started to arrive. The building has been featured on national television more than once, and the same patterns come up in every investigation. The orphan's wing had children, voices, and footsteps with occasional touches, and almost always reported as small hands. They say the hospital has a woman, sometimes glimpsed in white, sometimes just a voice. Every report that I've found says that she's calm and welcoming. But the basement's something different. The basement is the one space in the building where investigators consistently refuse to go alone, because it's where the morgue was. It's where the bodies were prepared. It's the only space in the building where there are reports of aggression. Things like growls, shoves, or scratches that actually draw blood. So whatever's down there, it's not reported as a child, and it doesn't seem interested in simple conversation. The property gained national attention when it was featured on Ghost Adventures. In the episode titled Oddfellows Asylum, the team conducted a full lockdown investigation inside of the building. Their focus was documenting any audio anomalies, movements, and environmental changes. While the episode follows the typical format for the show, it reinforces the idea that the property has multiple areas of recorded activity rather than just one single focal point. The investigation is centered around the former hospital in the residential area, which is often cited as the most active on the property. The significance isn't just the findings, it's the exposure. Once a location like this is featured on a national show, it definitely attracts more visitors, more investigations, and even more reported experiences. Even when you strip away all of the legends and embellishment, you're still left with a set of incidents that visitors, staff, and investigators report, and they're nearly identical year after year. One is of a small boy on the second floor of the orphan's wing. He's described almost every time as wearing dark clothes that look too formal for a child. He's seen at the end of hallways or peeking around corners. Some even say that they've seen him sitting on a stairwell that no longer exists. That stairwell that they say he was sitting on was removed in the 1960s. He isn't said to speak, he just approaches and then disappears. Another common sighting is a woman in the hospital wing. She's seen most often wearing a nurse's uniform and on the third floor at the nurse's station. She's reported to be moving with purpose, checking rooms, walking corridors as if she's still on shift. She's never been described as threatening. She has also never acknowledged the people who see her. The third sighting comes from the cemetery. The cemetery on the property is the most visually peaceful part of the campus. It's also the location where investigators most frequently report being followed, either back to their cars or into the parking lot, all the way to the road. Audio recordings made in the cemetery have repeatedly captured what sounds like a single voice saying the same word. The word stay. Today, you can drive up to the Belvoir Winery on a Saturday afternoon and have a glass of wine on the patio that overlooks the vineyard. You can book the building for your wedding, you can take a tour, and you can also book paranormal investigations. They run them on the weekends, but they typically sell out months in advance. The owners were very clear about what the building is. They didn't pretend that the activity had stopped. They didn't pretend that the third floor was comfortable. They'll tell you before you start where in the building people get touched, where people get pushed, and where they've personally seen things that they can't explain. They'll tell you that almost nobody finishes the basement portion of the tour. The Independent Order of Odd Fellows swore an oath more than a century ago to take care of people no one else would take care of. They built this building to keep that oath. The strangest thing about the Belvoir Winery is not the people that they see there. It's the impression reported again and again in nearly identical language by people who are not there to be scared. That whatever is left in the building is still keeping the oath. Visiting, watching, burying the dead, caring for the orphans, and refusing to leave. This was haunted case number 2, the Oddfellows home. And unlike my last video, the Sour Castle, this one you can actually go walk through yourself. Now, Belvoir wasn't the only place that was built like this. There's another one in Kansas City. Same time period and same kind of history. So, please subscribe because in my next video, there's even more reported activity. Case 3, the Epperson House.